whenever you're ready.
Okay. Hi everyone, I'm Emma, and as you all probably know by now, I'm studying Hugo Chavez and his revolutionary tools of political persuasion. Okay, so in 1998, something revolutionary happened. Hugo Chavez attempted a coup d'etat of the state of Venezuela, but failed. He was jailed, and then 3 years later, in 1998, he democratically became president. He wanted to start something he called the Bolivarian Revolution, which was a political movement in the late 1990s that focused on the values of Simón Bolivar. Now, that was kind of ambiguous. What were his values exactly? Simón Bolivar, for those of you who don't know, was a caudillo in the early 1800s who liberated most of South America and hoped to create what he called Gran Colombia, which is basically the equivalent of the United States today, a united South America. So Chavez was keen on his ideas and decided to use Simón Bolivar as a platform for his campaign. Now, the followers of Chavez were known to be called Chavists, or follow the Chavismo. And I'm just going to define a couple of terms that will become important here in a bit. So that's Chavismo. Chavez was a socialist leader, and socialism can be loosely defined as a political ideology that aims to nationalize key industries and tax the rich heavily. So and also seize some property from the wealthy people of Venezuela. And also Chavez can be characterized as a populist leader, which means that he was exerted power mostly through unmediated support by largely unorganized followers. And it also includes an aspect of having a personalistic leader. So Hugo Chavez was extremely relatable to the common man of Venezuela and was known for being very charismatic. So I was very interested in the history of Venezuela and the history of Hugo Chavez after his death in 2013, mostly because I was curious as to why he gained so much popular support if the rates of corruption in his time in office, which was from 1998 to 2013, was the highest that it had ever been in Venezuelan history, which is ironic because he actually ran for president on an anti-corruption campaign. So I was thinking, what have been some of the factors of his success? One factor that I identified from looking at multiple different texts, and here are my references. I just put the last name of each author. I have my full bibliography in my paper, but with the help of many authors here, I determined that language, his use of language was a huge factor in his success. And part of that was relying on appeals to authority by Simón Bolivar. An appeal to authority is an illogical fallacy where the rhetor seeks to persuade the audience not by actual facts, but by calling on someone who is loved and adored, such as Hugo Chavez such as Simón Bolivar in Venezuela. So there we go. Here's my research question, and put in simpler words, I'm basically hoping to discover what about Venezuela made it so susceptible to political rhetoric based on appeals to authority of Simón Bolivar. So here's just how I include the entire every aspect of my research in my question. Something to note that's important here is that I need to provide a baseline for what means a lot of appeals to authority in political rhetoric. So I decided to compare the political rhetoric of Hugo Chavez to that of George Bush, so that I could find just some kind of comparison, so that I could say, yes, Hugo Chavez did use more than another world leader, so that it doesn't seem, well, oh, maybe everyone employed this kind of rhetoric. Okay, so here's my working thesis, and it's culminated from the past couple of months that I've been working on this project. So in simple terms, it's that rates of appeals to Simón Bolivar's authority in the presidential rhetoric of Hugo Chavez were very high as compared to the speeches of George Bush, a phenomenon affected by the nature of the Venezuelan Revolution, social landscape of current-day Venezuela, and the process of Chavez's speech production. So I'll go on to explain that. Okay, so my method and approach. When I was trying to figure out which method I would use for my project, I was kind of stuck because it does involve linguistics, political science, and history. So there were a lot of different things that I could look at. And I decided to stick to linguistics, and in specific, sociolinguistics, which merges the study of sociology and linguistics. So a framework of knowledge that I discovered was pertinent to my project is called critical discourse analysis. And I could go on about this for a very long time, but just to succinctly put it for you. Critical discourse analysis is basically discourse analysis that aims to systematically pull apart language and discover how that language is affected by social power relations. So I thought it was perfect for my project because I'm looking at how a world leader affected the constituency of Venezuela. So something important about critical discourse analysis that that makes it different from normal discourse analysis is that it has an emphasis on the word critical, meaning that in a formal CDA, or critical discourse analysis, there will be a call to action or contended next steps at the end of the paper. So that's something that I'll talk about in my significance. And also that there's no defined methodology, which is something that was helpful for me, so I could go and do my research the way that I thought it suited best to my actual project. So the founders of CDA, a man named Norman Fairclough and Toon Van Dyke, those two of my citations there, said that there was no defined framework. So that kind of gave me a justification for my method, which I'll explain now. So in my results and findings. So there was, however, although it wasn't a defined methodology, 3 stages that every CDA should conform to. Stage 1 is description. So for my presentation, or for my paper, because I was talking about appeals to authority and the rhetoric of Hugo Chavez, my description would be labeling them, finding them, and recording them. So I could go into how I did this for a very long time, but basically here's just one example of one of just the rows of my tables for, this one was actually for President Bush. So I named the category of the speech, the name of the speech, how many words were in it in total, how many words were dedicated to an appeal to authority. So for instance, in the speeches of Bush, this would constitute any independence leader from the American Revolution, so Thomas Jefferson or George Washington, but in Venezuela, just Simón Bolívar. So in this speech, there were 0, unsurprising, because if you see the number that I got there, it's a lot lower than that of Chavez, and then the ratio was 0. So this is probably not the best example for one, but for all of the speeches that I analyzed, I found the actual ratio here. I found the ratio, and then I could see, and then I added them all together and divided by them by the number of speeches, so found the average, and then that's the number that you'll see right there. So as you can see, the ratio that I found for Chavez was actually 9 times greater than that of Bush. So I basically proved that Chavez uses more appeals to the authority of the liberators of his country than does another president. So I was able to say that yes, in comparison to some other countries, Chavez used a high rate of appeals to authority. So that was kind of my baseline to continue forward. So stage 2 is a description of the process of production, and I don't have time to go into it completely, but I identified 3 things that contributed to these appeals to authority: the impromptu nature of his speeches, the settings of his speeches, and the fact that there were no topics. And in stage 3, that's where you really talk about the social implications and the social landscape that the text came out of. So I talked about how in the 1800s, slavery in Venezuela, disenfranchisement of the people there, and the harsh social classes that existed. And in present day Venezuela, some would define as low quality of life, a low Gini coefficient, which measures income inequality, poverty, and a lack of transparency and corruption between the governments. Okay, so with my research, I identified that all of these factors contribute to the high rate of appeals to authority. So why does that even matter right now? I think that it matters because we are all subject to political rhetoric at every moment. We see it all the time right now because of the elections in the United States. And some of it can be deceptive, and that depends on how you want to look at it, but it's something that we deal with at every moment. So I think even if Hugo Chavez has passed away already, even if this isn't the country that we're from, it's still important. And I think it's also important to vote based on facts and a track record, not based on the charisma of the leader, because that's shown with the high rates of corruption in Chavez's time in office, although he was completely loved by his constituency. And it's extremely pertinent to Venezuela today because they are going through an economic crisis. Just to give you an idea of what that means, for instance, when you go to the grocery store, you have to stand in the line for an hour before you're allowed to go in. And to make these lines shorter, the government will say if your identity card ends in a 6, you can't go to the grocery store today. You have to leave the line. So stuff like that is just happening day in, day out. After the death of Hugo Chavez, the country falls even more of an economic crumble. So it's very important also because for the first time, there's a Democratic majority in the legislature, which is the Democratic Action Party. So it wasn't Hugo Chavez's fifth movement party. So there is a new group of people trying to change the way Venezuela is run. So it's important for them to look at this kind of political